Hey guys, welcome into the PuggoReborn channel. Today we're going to be getting into the next perk in the perk guide. Today's perk is Recover. I'm going to be giving you my deep detail analysis of this perk, followed by going into the Puggo RoundTable, in which community members come together to talk about the perk in depth, also giving you a rating from 1 to 5. 1 being great, 5 being terrible. You can check out the rating scale better in the description below, and then followed by going into the general discussion. If you do like this content or you've learned something, please hit that like and subscribe. Join the Discord where you can talk to me, talk to other community members about the game, of course, and also be a part of the roundtable or any other events that we do have going on the channel. So without further ado, let's get into Recover. To start the foundation, we need to look at the actual description of the perk. It says, unlocks the Recover skill, which allows for resting a turn, costs 9 action points in order to reduce accumulated fatigue by 50%. With that being said, there's 2 basics you need to understand with this perk. Number 1, your brothers always start with 9 action points, so when you add this to your skill slot, you have to give up a round in order to use this perk, unless Berserk, which we'll go over later. And number 2, you recover half of your current fatigue, not half of your max fatigue. As an example, if you have 50 fatigue buildup out of 80, you only recover 25 of that fatigue back. However, if you're completely fatigued out at 80, you get 40 fatigue back. Before we get into the deep dive, I have to bring up the meta strategy that is now dead since Blazing Deserts. Ultimately, Recover used to pair really great with Adrenaline because Adrenaline used to be 0 AP, 20 fatigue buildup, whereas Recover is 9 action points. This allowed you to use Adrenaline and then recover all of your fatigue back. However, now that has changed. Adrenaline has gone up +1 action point, so if you are coming back to the game, it's really important that you know this because the strategy is dead. With all the basic information out of the way, let's get into the deep dive. So let's get a deeper understanding of 9 action points. As it's already been established, every brother has 9 action points. It costs 9 action points to be able to use Recover, which ultimately leaves you no space to move, no space to attack, no space to use any kind of consumable, and even some perks which cost 1 action point. However, Berserk cushions it because it ultimately gives you +4 AP when you kill somebody. So if you take a single strike with a one-handed weapon or a cleaver, for instance, which is 4 action points, you are given back those 4 action points, bringing you back to 9 total action points. This allows you to use Recover. All other two-handed weapons do not work because it costs 5 to 6 action points total when you go to attack. Even if you kill something, you're only getting refunded a max of 8. It's also worth mentioning that Recover actually rounds up. What I mean by this is if you have 65 fatigue and you use Recover, your fatigue that you get back is 33. However, if you're at 64 fatigue, it goes to 32. You're getting a bit of a round up instead of that halfway point. Finally, a big piece of the puzzle is how fatigue actually works with initiative. Literally, fatigue and initiative are equal. They drop at the exact same rate. However, if you're using Relentless, it actually drops it at half of that rate. The example on the screen is 80 fatigue and 120 initiative. When you fatigue completely out at 80, you actually drop your initiative all the way to 40 initiative. With the perk Relentless, this actually cuts that in half. What that means is if you build up exactly 80 fatigue, your 120 initiative bro ends up dropping only 40 compared to that total 80. If you'd like to understand Relentless a little better, you can always check that out in the perk guide on the channel. So with that out of the way, I think it's great to establish the situations and when you're going to use it. I will say it's going to be brought up in the synergies, but it's great to establish this base now because you're not always going to have to use this perk come hell or high water. What I mean by this is if you have 80 fatigue total and you're fatigued out at 30, you may not want to use it because you're still fighting people. However, if it's a very convenient moment where nothing's attacking you, this is a great opportunity to use Recover just to get as much fatigue back. If you are completely fatigued out, that's when it shines its most because you're going to get 40 of that fatigue back at the end of it all. So let's look at a few kryptonites of this perk. Low melee defense can be a hindrance to Recover. Ultimately, when you're in the thick of the fight and you have 3 men around you, use an AoE, don't quite kill all of them, you have to hit Recover while they get a whole turn to beat on you. That can be a problem and can be a really key moment to turning the tide of a battle. Recover is also hindered by maces. If you're facing orcs, for instance, or just brigands, they have a lot of maces and stuff. If they hit you 1 time, that's 10 fatigue buildup. If they hit you twice, that's 20. And if you're taking on somebody with 2-handed maces, those build up 20 fatigue per hit. So it's very important to understand when you're using it, who's surrounding you. And finally, when does it become too much? What I mean by this is, if every 3 rounds you're using this perk, you may actually be losing more turns than you would if you just normally attack, not relying on recovery. Recovery can be a hindrance because you sit a full turn, as I talked about in Kryptonite number 1. But if you're fatiguing your brother out too fast, it can actually become a greater issue than being a helpful perk. Let's check out some of the traits that work and don't work and are kind of in the middle with this perk. Now let's check out the good traits, starting with athletic. It ultimately gives you a buildup of 2 less fatigue per tile moved. That can ultimately help you out a lot to not have to use recover so often, but also gives you the opportunity to get the most of it back as you move forward on the battlefield. Interestingly enough, fat is another trait that actually is pretty good, because ultimately recover gives you back the fatigue until you lose the fat trait. Next one is Iron Lungs, recovers 3 extra fatigue every turn. That goes from 15 up to 18. That's beautiful. The main thing here is that it gives you more time before having to use recover, and even after using recover, it's a slow build up as well. If you're building an initiative brother, quick is awesome because it does separate from fatigue. This is a less drop as you get more fatigued out. And finally, strong. Of course, strong gives you plus 10 extra fatigue. This is great because more time it takes to get to the point of having to use recover, the better. As we go into the negative traits, I do want to make it known that recover does help these traits, but ultimately the less you use recover in a fight, the better. Arguably one of the worst traits in the game, asthmatic, -3 fatigue recovery build up. It goes from 15 per turn down to 12. This may help in the way of recovery, being able to take it out, but it does hurt in the long run. Next is Clubfoot. Clubfoot is plus 2 fatigue buildup per tile traveled. This again can build your fatigue up at an accelerating rate. While the fat trait isn't that big of a deal and goes away, gluttonous does not. Gluttonous makes it so that you become fat, then you lose fat, then you become fat, then you lose fat. It goes in order like that. It can be a real pain in the butt when it comes to fatigue. Now let's move to synergies of recover. First synergy has to go to Berserk, ultimately being able to take a 4 action point attack and then have that 4 action point recovered from killing something is so amazing, being able to refund that fatigue. Flipping a page from that same book, it's really effective with noble sword builds. Ultimately, you can use riposte, 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 being able to attack your opponent back, and then when you're fatigued out the very next turn, you take an opportunistic strike to kill somebody, refunding that 4 AP to be able to recover, followed by the next turn going back into riposte again. Remember how I said don't fatigue out really fast? Well, it still applies in terms of constantly using recover, but in the way of AoEs or using attacks that are constantly going to be fatiguing you out quickly, this is a great perk to synergize with fatigue recovery. So recovery can actually be a saving perk. For instance, rotation or footwork, using these are pretty heavy fatigue intensive things, but if it gets you out of a terrible situation and you can sit around just to get your wits about you and recover, it's definitely worth a look. In terms of saving perks, let's segue into tanks, because they're really the saving grace of your brothers. Ultimately, they have to use Indom to hold the line. They'll use Shield Wall in a bad situation. They use Adrenaline to go first, or Taunt to hold an enemy. They'll also rotate brothers out, or they'll use weapons even to destroy armor, to stun an enemy, to disarm an enemy, or they'll use a Spear Wall to keep enemies at bay. At the end of the day, when they're using these perks, it's very easy to fatigue out within a few rounds, though you may not have to do anything for multiple rounds. So this is a great perk for them. Recover probably comes in at its strongest point when it comes to the actual fights. What I mean is when you're facing a boatload of zombies and you're hitting them, you kill them, they come back to life, or there's a necromancer bringing them up back to life constantly. The best way to kill them is by doing a fatal kill to them, taking their head off, crushing their head, and I believe disemboweling them. The main thing here is constantly having to blow out your fatigue with non-stop attacks. Following that fight comes in with the Plentiful of Orcs, which is the Sea of Tents. Has Orc Young, Orc Berserkers, Orc Warriors, and the Orc Warlord. You face a lot of these guys with a lot of armor on top of that. While it is very intense with the durability of your swords, it's also very intense on the fatigue of your brothers. Really guys, any big fight where you're taking on 30 enemies can be very fatigue intensive, so be prepared for that. Speaking of big fights, it brings up a lot of synergy when it comes to the legendary locations. The 3 legendary locations that may falter a little bit would be Mad Barbarian, the Jirok, and the Witch Hut. All the other ones, phenomenal for this perk, especially when taking on the Kraken. There's times when you're not being attacked by the tentacles and you can waste a turn, or actually use a turn to use recover and get your fatigue back and ready for the next round. It's really important that we bring up initiative builds in general, because initiative is so highly dictated by fatigue. fatigue. When you put these together, it's important to know also that the perks are affected. For instance, overwhelm is very important because when you're ahead of an enemy in initiative order, you can debuff them per attack, whether you hit the shield or not. You can debuff them 10% of their melee and range skill. Now, it also applies heavily when it comes to dodge, because dodge is 15% of your total initiative. So if your initiative is incredibly low, you can imagine how fast your melee and range defense gets fluctuated by this. If you'd like to understand overwhelm and dodge better as a perk, you can check that out in my perk guides. In terms of initiative, I'd be out of place if I didn't bring up fencers. Fencers use the ability lunge, and so this lunge ability is dictated on how high your initiative is to boost your actual damage. Now, initiative is affected by fatigue, which can be a problem because it's so fatigue intensive to lunge. It's all kind of like a circle of life going on here, so you need recover, and it's even more so when you're using Berserk, being able to lunge 3 times in a turn. Since Blazing Deserts has dropped, many dagger builds have come out of the woodworks thanks to the Cuddle Dagger. However, if you're one of those old school brothers, you can always use the dagger specialist using puncture. Now, even with the mastery, it's still very heavy in fatigue at 45, so recover is almost an absolute must with these type of builds. The final synergy is up to you. Ultimately, you don't want to use this perk every other turn, but if you can find a synergy where it's every 4 turns or every 5 turns, that is up to the user to decide. As long as you're winning those battles, that's all that matters. Now let's look at some recover perk combos. First perk has to go to Berserk. Once per turn upon killing an enemy, you get 4 action points regained automatically. This is fantastic because in your first attack, if you kill somebody with a 4 AP weapon, you ultimately get all 9 AP back, allowing you to recover the same turn. Number 2 goes to Brawny. Ultimately, the fatigue and initiative penalty from wearing armor and helmet is reduced by 30%, which means you have more fatigue in general. So with more fatigue, if you're burnt out, that's more fatigue back through recover. At number 3, Underdog, the defense malus due to being surrounded by an opponent no longer applies to this character. If the attacker has Backstabber perk, the effect of that perk is negated and the normal defense malus due to being surrounded is applied instead. Ultimately, guys, it negates the ability of the enemies surrounding you to have those extra stats. This is very important, guys, because you have to wait a full round after you recover. To be fair, there's a laundry list of perks that actually work really well with recover. Anticipation for saving you, shield expert for holding you, relentless because of initiative, rotation for saving, rally the troops depending on your build for sergeants, taunt for your heavy bros, footwork for safety, overwhelm for initiative, nimble battleforge depending on your builds, duelist because you're using a duelist, and finally indom. I'm not trying to hold them out because I get it. Those are all great perks because they're heavy fatigue intensive, but those are the 3 key that came to mind. Just a reminder, we're going to be splitting up the perk guide from the roundtable when we get into tier 2. If you do like this content, please hit that like, subscribe, and join the Discord to be part of the discussion. Without further ado, let's get into the roundtable. Alright guys, so now we're into the round table. We're going to have each of the community members come forth and give you their thoughts about this perk, of course, and give you a rating from 1 to 5. If you'd like to understand that scale a little bit better, or in the description below will be the scale. So without further ado, Baba, what do you think about Recover?
So I'm going to give Recover rank 1 because Recover is one of my favorite perks. I put it on everyone. Because it's just so good, like especially in long battles where your guys are so fatigued, you like max fatigue, you can only attack once per round. So you use Recover, you wait 1 turn, but now you can attack like 2 times every turn instead of once. So if you don't have Recover and you have these long fights, it's so annoying. Like if you have a guy with Berserk, you get to kill one guy, you get the AP, but you can't do anything. You can't attack, you can't move, you can't do anything because you know you have no stamina anymore. If you could even like kill Recover, so you kill, you recover, and now you can do everything else again like you used to do in the first few rounds, because now you have all the stamina to do so. I really is one of the most useful perks, I think, because stamina is everything in this game. Can't do anything without it. But it's not the only thing it's not good for is 0 stam builds, because obviously you're not supposed to have a lot of stamina and you only attack once per round. You regain like 15 fatigue each turn, and they're just supposed to attack once, so that's okay for 0 stam builds not to have Recover. But otherwise I think it's imperative for every build, because you're gonna use up stamina with each attack and you're just gonna add up and add up. until until you like you're full. You have no fatigue left. So yeah, you have to recover basically to keep going in the fight to be efficient and eliminate the threat basically. So
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it pretty much you laid out the gist of just like it's your favorite. Did you say it's your favorite perk? Is that right?
it
Or
has to be.
it has to.
One of
Oh,
my
it has
favorites
to
at
be. That is a solid one right there. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Anybody have any questions for him then? All right. Well, then with that being said, we're gonna move on to CarveaHole, what do you think about Recover?
I agree that Recover is a 1. Recover is an essential perk for nearly every build, I believe. Your frontliners, your tanks, your archers, your bannermen, basically every other build will stam out in these crucial fights. And the quickest way to get your stam back is to use Recover and to get that max efficiency back. So you lose a turn, except if you with a 4 AP attack, if you kill and then you proc with Berserk, you get your 9 AP back, you can recover. But barring that, you lose a turn. But since you get back half of your fatigue, you gain more AP in the future, so you're actually winning, assuming it's a long fight. Additionally, I just want to say, Recover is a good first-line perk, so if you don't have something on the second row you want to take, you can take like Student and Recover, or Colossus and Recover, and you get access to tier 3 perks, and you're probably going to use Recover on your build, so it's really good. There's very few builds that don't want Recover. Builds that have Pathfinder don't need Recover, but once they do get stammed out, it is annoying, so you have to really make sure they don't get stammed out super quickly. I don't take Recover on hybrids. On my hybrid build, that's little famous. But once I've noticed, once they get stammed out, it is a little annoying. So you kind of have to have Pathfinder as the other option. Maybe if you have Iron Lungs, you don't need Recover. But other than that, I think it's kind of necessary for almost every build, especially when you're doing stuff like Indom or Shield Wall, or you're berserking, or you're just swinging a lot because you're a duelist. It's pretty imperative. So a 1.
Yeah, I definitely like the way you said that about the like action points, for instance. You're pretty much gaining more, or not action points, but more. Well, yeah, action points, right? Is what you're kind of saying. Is
AP,
that,
yeah.
AP, yeah. So the more turns that you have where you can do more than one attack is obviously going to be really beneficial. So yeah, definitely good. Any questions for him? Any comments?
I would just like to add that if you're planning on making a company with but you can only give Recover to a few people, I would give Recover to the tanks, because they're the ones that are gonna taunt, they're the ones that are gonna indom, you rotate, all of that stuff. So those are the people who use the most stamina heavy moves. So I would give it to those first and foremost.
Right on. Okay. Well, with that being said, then we're gonna jump into Despicable Dick. What do you got for us? What do you think about Recovery?
Good evening, guys. So, I'd like to say that before the last DLC came out, I'd say easy one, this perk, because how well it worked with Adrenaline, and because there were no stam potions, or they didn't work this way. So now it's you're gonna hate me for this. It's a 4 for me, because I hate this perk. I hate this perk because you have to use the whole turn to get stam back, and you need a lot of stam to have on Brother to make a good use from this perk, because you only get a half of total spent, right? There are builds that guys Baba and Carvey said it's correctly Banner, because Rally the Troops uses a lot of stam, and Tanks because they use a lot of stam because of Indom and maybe Adrenaline and maybe Taunt. But I rarely use it because it only helps in very long fights, and it only helps on brothers with a lot of base fatigue. It's quite rare to get a really good, let's say, battle-forged brother for a tank with a lot of fatigue, so this perk really... I've never tested it with a Berserk, so I don't know how this works. Probably good from what you said. The last thing I like to say positive thing about this perk is that if you have a brother with very, very low initiative, so that's possibly a Battle-Forged tank, and he has both Adrenaline and Recover, even now the Adrenaline, you can, now with 1 AP cost, I mean, you can Indom. Okay, so let's say we start a battle, and you have a tank. He is going the last after every other brother and after every other enemy. So you use adrenaline on him. He goes first next round. He can shield wall or use Indomin, and then he will have those abilities on for this very turn when he's first and for the whole next turn because he goes the last in the next turn. So in this situation, you cut the cost of Indom or Shield Wall or both of them in half actually, because you use them only once per 2 turns, and recovery works there quite good because again you use it on the end of the turn. It doesn't hurt you early on, so the tank will fulfill its role for a couple of turns and then he can recover, but he already did a lot of good job there. I like this actually this use of this. Yeah, so I think that's it.
Well, very good. Yeah, no, I actually like that you brought up some of those things. Those were some really great points, of course. So when a lot of people do believe that recover cuts half of your fatigue at all times, like your total fatigue. So if you have, let's say I have a brother with 80 fatigue, in theory I'd always be getting 40 fatigue back no matter whenever I do it. But the truth of it is if you have 50 fatigue, you're only recovering 25 fatigue of that, because it's just based on where your fatigue level is. It can be a little lackluster because you're wasting a turn for 25 fatigue, and that's fine and all, but I can see it depends on your builds and stuff, I would say, for the usage and how effective, or even the way that you were talking about the high or low initiative brothers going to the end. I'll talk about that later, of course, but yeah, any questions for him?
Yeah, do you not use Berserk?
I use, but I mostly use it on guys to dish out a lot of damage, and when I use this, I just ensure that guy has a lot of fatigue. So if he cannot battle forge like heavy armor and go with Berserk too, then I just go with Nimble build and hope he'll survive. And it works just fine against most of the opponents. There are some that are pain in the ass versus those kind of builds, and those are only enemies that shoot you. When they shoot at you, they can just pierce through armor like in no time. But on the other hand, if you go with nimble guys to the north and face barbarian camps, then whatever, because they can pierce this armor anyway. So actually nimble helps to prevent injuries, especially if you have a lot of health and Colossus. And offensive brother can still fulfill its role and just dish out a lot of damage with Berserk and without recover. I used a bit recover before, but again it was with adrenaline costing no AP and with Indom costing fewer AP, and it all make more sense. I also used this before the DLC came out on archers, because there is a point in battle when it's prolonged that archers become useless because they have to switch arrows and they stam out, they cannot move, etc. And recover really helped with this, especially with quick hands, because they can get AP back from quick hands when they switch weapons or arrows, and they can just switch arrows, recover, and then they're like fresh. But with the last DLCs, there are some camps that you don't need archers for, like barbarians, so it's better to use throwing weapons, and you don't need that much stun on throwing guys because they can only go throw in close range, so there's a lot of time when they move and when they don't throw. And if you have Pathfinder on those guys, then you won't need that much fatigue, and I use a lot of Pathfinder, so it works like full recover for a lot of my brothers, especially two-handers.
Right on. Any other questions? All right, well then we're gonna move on then. Flak, what do you think about recover?
Okay, recover is a 2 for me. If we're just thinking without any traits, most members will have it. The members that will is going to be either two-handers, rangers, or dagger bros. And by rangers, I mean any sort of ranged weaponry. The two-handers use up fatigue like no tomorrow, the way I play, and I really want them to constantly use their skills that build up the fatigue. But in order to do that, I use recover, even though it spends one turn. Unless they have berserk, then I just allow them to attack, and if they get a kill, recover. If not, next turn we'll recover. But yeah, I have them use recover even though it's a one-turn use, you cannot do anything in that. It still allows them to build up, well, to reduce the amount of fatigue that they have. And since they're two-handers, I usually have them have a huge amount of fatigue, so if that happens, I actually get several turns back. About the range, they might not have the biggest amount of stamina, but if they don't have footwork, they will have this, and I want them to fire, every round and then recover, instead of fire, wait a turn, fire, wait a turn. That is just horrible in my case. And Dagger Bros, I like to have them keep their fatigue up, just so that I can have them chase after an enemy that is trying to flank us, or have them chase after an enemy that has some stuff I'd like, and they're either running away or, trying to get an easy kill off of my guys.
Anything else, or is that it for you?
That's it. Basically, if they don't have useful skills, I build them like I normally do. If they do, I build around them. So
Right on. Okay. Anybody have any questions for him?
I have one tip for Flak though about archers. There is a case where you have no stam on archers and they can only shoot once, but I found out that you can mostly get away with just aiming shots instead of quick shots, and it works nicely because you can go for pretty targets later in the battle. More, just keep on recover. But recover is awesome.
the reason why I have recover on my people is because they do not have footwork, or the other perk, Pathfinder. There we go. They don't have Pathfinder. I put Pathfinder on my throwers so that, to be honest, they're going to move around constantly, and then once they run out, they're melee. But I have my archers with recover because I just want those juicy targets, and those juicy targets just happen to be right up close to them. And I don't care about missing shots. I care about actually hitting most of my targets without aiming, because if I aim, it's only one shot, and I'm actually 9 times out of 10 hitting everybody around them. I don't try to aim for one person. I try to aim for a group. And if I just fire without a care in the world, a group of guys to hit targets that I might not actually manage to hit. Sometimes if you aim at a target that has protection, 9 times out of 10 you're going to hit that protection. However, if you shoot the guy next to him, you're no longer aiming at the guy protected to him. You're aiming at the guy next to him. And if I miss, I sometimes hit the people around him, which still happens to be the guy in protection.
I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. How does that matter with recover?
I'm shooting so many arrows.
Okay.
All right.
Also, I would just like to say that sorry, I would just like to say that I like having archers with high range defense because I can put them out in the open without them getting shot, and they can shoot everybody else. So.
All right, Shinobi, what do you think about recovery?
I know that it has its uses, but for me, it's a 5. I use it on just a couple of guys, and I know last roundtable we were talking about adrenaline, and I had mentioned my rotation cannon. So let me real quick take you through a couple turns of Husni the Cannonball. So we rotate him up to the front line after they move forward. He will swing. He's got 82 fatigue, not bad for a two-hander, but swing for 23, always get a kill. That's how we roll. Swing for 23, doesn't matter if he gets another kill, but he usually does. Then we're gonna hit adrenaline, bringing him up to 71 out of that 82 fatigue. That's quite a first turn. We're gonna knock it down 15 at the end of his turn, bringing him at 56. It's only gonna give him enough room for one more swing when the rest of the fodder moves in. After that swing, bring him up to 79. He cannot take any more actions. So I come to a crossroads at his next turn. We start the turn at 64 fatigue. Do I do his only attack, an overhand strike, to gain another 12 fatigue? It's going to take me to 76, leaving him at 61 next turn, with his only option being another overhand strike. And then finally, after all of that, is going to resolve at the end of his turn. He'll start his third turn at 58, allowing him one swing, and then we have to start the whole cycle over again. Or with that 64 fatigue built up, am I going to hit my recover? Cut it in half, recover another 15, and start that turn with 17 stamina and unleash carnage again. Seems like a pretty cut and dry choice to me. I like killing lots, and I like killing fast. I can sit back for one turn, recover basically down to nothing, and just start going to town again. But it is a 5 because I'm going to take it on a specialty character like that. I'm probably going to take it on a tank. Other than that, though, I used a lot of Pathfinder and try to manage my fatigue very well. Every once in a while, it's going to bite you in the butt if you run into spiders, goblins, something like that, where you're just getting overwhelmed and you build up a lot of fatigue from taking hits. But again, like Carve said, time and time again, like those things are just so easily killable. Doesn't matter if you're fatigued out, you're going to kill one every turn, every bro, unless, you get RNG. It being a 5, though, it just doesn't have a whole lot of place in my company. I did ultimately learn its value running my almost 500-day Lone Wolf campaign with 5 Hedge Knights, and nobody had recover. Fighting 40-some Wiedergangers and a Necromancer is not fun when nobody can recover. I mean, they're not going to bite through that armor, but that is the longest, drawn-out, low-risk, boring battle I've ever taken place in. Just one a turn. And those are my thoughts on recovery. It's great, but it's not a must-have. It's a specialty for me.
So, I mean, do you average out with everybody? Everybody has recovery, though? Or are you saying no?
Two people, maybe.
2 people, maybe. Because I know you were saying just a second ago with all of your guys didn't have it, and it was a pain with...
No, none of them had it, and it was awful.
Or none of them had it, I mean, sorry.
None of them had it. None of them had it on that run,
right.
And it was horrible. If I would have had just one of my Hedge Knights with recovery on that run, it wouldn't have been an issue because he would have been able to make up the difference, especially if he was a Hedge Knight wielding a greatsword. Hit recovery, go in, chop, always run Berserk, ARB, always run Berserk. And then he can take the heat off of the other guys. But when you're running a specialty build, Hoosney the Cannonball has to have recovery because he goes in hot. Move my brothers up, rotate. He's in the front line, double swing, chopping heads. Next turn gets another swing in because they don't wise up by that point. They still move in to surround him. And after that, you absolutely have to recover or he's going to be worthless for 3 turns.
All right, cool. Does anybody else have any questions for him? Or? All right, so then I'm gonna go into mine then. So for me, it's a 2. It's an absolute solid 2. I will say this though, depending on what type of builds you're doing, of course, this is going to definitely range for people. If I can understand where Despicable is coming from without taking it, or with Shinobi without taking it, or whatever the case may be, how it works for you. Action points is of course a huge part of it. Berserk gives you the opportunity on like duelist builds and so on to refund it in the same turn, but otherwise there's other things where you're attacking with 2-handers and you're not being able to refund it if you use Berserk. You can take the opportunity strike to kill multiple people, and the next turn you'd have to use it, but it is more efficient to be able to use it in the first turn, which should be in the guide at least. So the main thing is this: if you're using a lot of like the specialty perks where you're doing indom, rotation, footwork, shield wall, adrenaline, all these things, all these special perks end up stacking your fatigue. If you don't build really high fatigue, then of course these things are going to work against you. Of course, rallying the troops, if you're having to do it constantly, it's going to wear on the guys, it's going to wear on them. So ultimately there is a huge place for it, and I feel like a lot of the way people build brothers now is with these specialty perks that tack on. But one of the things again that Despicable brought up, when you're using recover, you're only dropping your fatigue as much fatigue as you have. So if you have 50 fatigue, you're only getting 25 of that fatigue back. If you have maxed filled up fatigue bar at 80, then you're getting 40. So there is a balance there that jumps around that really matters. The one thing that I love about Recover is the fact that when you are, sometimes after you kill somebody, your brother can either jump back into the fight or he can take a personal round to use recovery out of just the simplicity of having that ability. One of the biggest fights in the game where Recover overwhelmingly is helpful, as well as Pathfinder, is going against the Kraken, for instance. The Kraken is one where there are rounds where your guy can attack, but is in a special position where he can just take that round and then help your brothers out in the next coming round to either pull them away from I almost said vines, but the tentacles themselves. So there's a lot of ways that you can really look at this. The reason it's a 2 for me is because I don't have it on everybody. My backline, I'll use Pathfinder before I'll use Recover. And the reason is because with pole arms, you're taking one shot. Yes, if you have Berserk, which a lot of times your pole arms will have Berserk or your archers will have Berserk, the same thing can be applied the way that Despicable brought up this as well, is the fact that you don't have to take quick shots all the time. Yes, it's nice to get those 2 shots off on them, but if you're taking priority shots, one thing I have is the build, the Niche Sniper. It's literally meant to be a sniper. He's meant to use the single aim shots because it's better accuracy. It's deadly. I mean, it can still be very deadly if you build out right. With Killing Frenzy, all these other things. But ultimately, Recover isn't a big deal to have in that type of build because you're getting most of your fatigue back per shot. Or if you need to taking a round for that type of archer and using Pathfinder can actually help you more than just simply recovering half of your fatigue or whatever because of the way that you're playing it out. I think it's there's more situations where you could use it than you don't. But again, with Berserk, one of the things going back to that, if I'm using somebody to attack twice with a two-hander, let's say you're using the two-handed cleaver, or you're using a really high intense build that's a duelist, for instance. When you're using a duelist and you're striking twice and then you're hitting Berserk, there's a chance that you're obviously going to go through your fatigue. If you're using Masters or not, that can also help your fatigue where you don't need to recover. But for the most part, using these abilities to attack multiple times can be huge on your fatigue. Now let's say for a second you have Berserk, but you take a shot and kill somebody on your first turn. You refund the AP, allowing you to use Recover immediately afterwards because you were able to kill somebody and then use Recovery. This is of course based on 4 AP attacks. That synergy is huge. One of the best builds I've found for it, or with it, is like a riposte bot type of build. You're riposting, and then you have an opportunity kill. You take that kill the very next round, then hit Recovery. Usually they have a mass amount of fatigue. For me, whenever I do a Swordmaster type of build, I always have about 90 to 100 fatigue. This way, when I do use Recover, it's going to refund a mass amount of fatigue that can obviously help you. I don't use it too much in the early game because a lot of times you don't have a great deal of fatigue and there's other perks that can really help you. If you are doing a scale run where you're running through the map quickly, trying to just establish your company quicker, yes, it's really effective. And the final thing I want to bring up, because everyone already brought up a lot of these other ones. Well, there's 2 last things actually. Number 1 would be Dagger Specialist. While the Cuddle Dagger, you can strike somebody 1,000 times, it can still be really helpful if you're doing puncture as well. Obviously, if you're puncturing a lot. If you fatigue out and you use that, because that recovery actually helps, I feel like, the Dagger Specialist, because of the fact that when you do fatigue out and you do recovery, that gives you 2 to 3 times more rounds than somebody else who would be using that. But the final thing would be more for your initiative type of builds. If you don't already know this, your initiative drops with your fatigue. So being able to refund the exact amount of initiative dropped off through fatigue is obviously huge for those more nimble builds, or for instance like fencers who use Berserk, definitely vastly helped by this perk. So, or even like dodge and stuff, you could throw that in there as well, getting back at least 3 to 5, even more than 3 to 5. I mean, you could be 3 to 10 extra defense based on how high your initiative is. So that is my rounded out thing. It's a solid 2. For some it's going to be 1, others are going to be 4, but yeah, so that's where I stand. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
All right, well, with that being said, let's get into the general discussion. What do you guys think?
I want to say one thing.
Yeah, go for it.
So consider we have a two-hander, either nimble or battle forced, but a two-hander with a lot of stam. Okay, so a lot of two-handed weapons use a second skill or third that is high on stam or fatigue, like AoE damages from hammer from a sword, or the boink from mace. And consider that this guy has a berserk, because you feel comfortable about having berserk on this guy because he has a lot of stam. So such two-hander uses a lot of stun because of Berserk and uses a lot of stun because of the secondary skills like stun or AoE damage. And there will be a point in longer fights where this stun is gone. This whole fatigue is gone, and he can only boink use the basic attack once per turn. Berserk is useless there, and half of the weapon is useless, right? So this is moment when you could consider recover, and it really does the work, because when you recover with such man later in the fight, then he goes back to the business, and even though maybe he cannot use area of effect skills anymore efficiently, maybe he can still use just base attack with Berserk efficiently. The problem with such two-hander is that, of course, Berserk cannot help him recover in the same time, in the same turn when he attacks. And what does it mean? It means that he can only recover alone on turn. So he won't have all fat used, because he will get some fat by ending the previous turn. I don't know how much that is exactly. I think about 12,
15.
15, yeah. Following this logic, you'd like to use it on guys who are like two-handers, but they can use Berserk with recovery, and it works even better because you don't skip on those 15 fat, because you just cut someone with a cleaver or a dagger or anything like this, or you throw a throwing thingy, or you shoot from a bow. And I think that for both two-handers and guys with just 4 AP, 3 AP weapons, it's very good, but my anxiety cannot let me count on kill on the first hit. So this is why I skip recover on the Berserk. Although it's very good, like you said.
Oh, 100%. And I completely agree with that. When you're using, like I say, with any of the specialty perks and stuff, or using AoEs a lot, you're going to burn through fatigue. It's just bound to happen, of course. So to take a round to be able to refund that, to keep going. I mean, even in lone wolf builds, I admit that when I do my lone wolf builds, I always use recover and I use Pathfinder to be able to get after whatever it is that's running away, or being able to get in position, better position faster, running away from whatever in the forest, yada yada. But ultimately, when you using AoEs is what's going to get you the win quicker, or kills faster, morale checks faster. So to be more efficient in terms of being able to use these AoEs and then recover immediately afterwards is so prevalent. Anybody else?
I think I have a question for Despicable. So, like, you were saying that you don't put recover on your throwing guys because they don't lose enough stamina.
Yeah.
Because of Pathfinder.
Yes. Also, those are archers type guys, so they have a lot of free stam because they don't use heavy armor. And I skip on range defense and go with stam instead, and this works.
Okay, I understand.
So yeah, so there was an idea earlier when I was playing Battle Brothers that archers need to have high range defense because goblins and stuff like this can shoot them and cut them into pieces. But in fact, the way that IE works is that they prioritize targets with lower range defense. So mostly they aim for guys that are in front and without a shield. So that is your frontliners, two-handers mostly. And there is a problem with that, because if you have a nimble frontliner without a shield, that he's in trouble because he's a numero uno target. But in any case, archers are mostly safe.
Okay. All right. Well, then we'll call it there, guys. Hopefully you guys did like this. Please hit the like, subscribe for more content just like this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.